Thank you all very much for coming here today on the 179th anniversary of the fire to hear about the day Parliament burned down. So the 16th of October 1834 was for contemporaries one of the greatest events of their lives. It was for them like the assassination of JFK or the death of Princess Diana. It was something that they remembered through the rest of their lives, and its repercussions carried on into the early 20th century. But today, this is a largely forgotten event, and I think that that's because the new Palace of Westminster, the new Houses of Parliament that was built in its place by Barry and Pugin from the 1840s and through to the 1860s onwards, and it's just over that way, has become so famous as an icon of London, of Britain indeed, the world over, that really it's obliterated from our memories what was there before. But the building that was there before, the old Houses of Parliament, is a building worth remembering because this is the structure in which some of the great set pieces of English history took place. This is where Thomas More, William Wallace and Charles I were tried. This is where there were the great debates in the Civil War and over slavery and the rise of empire. This is the place where the only assassination of a Prime Minister took place. The laptop looks like it's about to run out. I didn't check that as well. Looks to me like it's running off a battery, and battery pack is
the glamorous part of my job. Okay, go with me.
So I'll just carry on until this dies. This is the place where these great set pieces of English history took place, including the assassination of Spencer Perceval, the Prime Minister in 1812. So that's why it's worth remembering. So to start off with, I'm going to give you a guided tour around the old Palace of Westminster, and we'll see how far we get before the battery runs out. Okay, so here is Old Palace Yard. This is the southern end of the current Houses of Parliament today. And in foreground here you can see the Victoria Tower, which is where we store the parliamentary archives, about 10 kilometres of historic records going back to the 15th century. But the old Palace of Westminster was situated probably only about halfway along this enormous west frontage here. It occupied the space here and then back towards the building we're in now. And it looked like this. So very different, and at the time this was a very unpopular building because of its design. This facade here was part of the House of Lords, built onto the front of what had become a very higgledy-piggledy, chaotic mass of buildings by the end of the 18th century. The facade, created by James Wyatt, who was at that time Master of the King's Works, got a lot of criticism in the press. They called it the cotton mill, the factory. MPs were less popular, less keen on it. They called it the gentleman's lavatory. And it was thought that the Office of Works created buildings that were really the ugliest imaginable. So at the southern end here we have John Soane's grand entrance, the new royal entrance that he built onto this chaotic mass of buildings at the end of the 1820s. And that's designed to provide a ceremonial entrance into the palace for the monarchs George IV and William IV. And then here, this block here is the House of Commons, and the middle floor here is the Commons committee rooms, and the top floor there are Bellamy's refreshment rooms, the cafe, restaurant for MPs where you can get the best chop and claret in London. So let's look at the northern end of today's Houses of Parliament. It's a very famous view. You've got Big Ben with Elizabeth Tower as it's been renamed. And you've got the two twin towers here, the two square towers at the northern end of Westminster Hall, the northern gable end there. And in 1834 it looked like this. So you can still see the two twin towers there with the northern gable end. But there's this huge building here. What's this? This is the Law Courts. The Palace of Westminster was not simply the main residence of the monarch from the Middle Ages onwards. It was also the seat of government and of the law. And the law courts had met inside Westminster Hall from the Middle Ages onwards. Then in the 1820s, John Soane again built this new block onto the front of Westminster Hall to provide much better accommodation for the law courts. And one of the interesting things here is just how very close it is to the east end of Westminster Abbey. As you exit Portcullis House and go round towards Westminster Tube when you leave here, you'll be able to see the Henry VII Chapel, which is what this is, of Westminster Abbey. But in 1834, the palace was much, much closer to the east end of the Abbey than it is today, and that's an important part of the story. Also an important part of the story are these red-roofed buildings here. These are the buildings of the Exchequer. That's the medieval and early modern Department of Finance. We still have the Chancellor of the Exchequer today, who would be called in other countries Minister of Finance. So if you take a cross-section across the House of Commons, the Abbey is this side here, the river is that side, you can see what a higgledy-piggledy mass of floors and corridors and staircases it's become by 1834. Constant additions over the centuries have turned this into a complete rabbit warren and also an accident waiting to happen. Here we have those committee rooms again that I pointed out on the exterior slide, and Bellamy's refreshment rooms here, the southern gable end of Westminster Hall, and then there's this block here. This, as you can probably see, was once a royal chapel. This was once the chapel of the medieval palace, known as St Stephen's. What happened at the end of the 17th century was that Christopher Wren, then Master of the King's Works as well, put in a ceiling here and a floor here to turn a wonderful Gothic chapel, one of the most important buildings in later medieval Europe, into a much smaller space so that the Commons could meet there more comfortably. And the Commons had met inside St Stephen's Chapel since 1548, when Edward VI handed this part of the building over to the Commons for its use. If you were a woman in 1834, you couldn't view debates actually inside the chamber, in the public gallery here. You had to go up into the attic and look at the MP's feet below you by peering through this little ventilation shaft in the ceiling, through the little windows here. That was the only way that women could view debates. And if you were an MP in 1834, you would come into the building really through the back door. There was no fancy ceremonial entrance. You'd come in here, you'd go up the steps, up another staircase, across and down, and then up and up and up. You can see how unplanned the whole thing had become by the late Georgian period. You'd get to this space here, which is the Commons lobby, and it was just by this fireplace here that the Prime Minister Spencer Perceval was shot in 1812. And then finally you'd make it into the Commons chamber itself, which looked like this. So it was a very tight wooden box, no trace at all of that Gothic chapel underneath. It was all covered over by the wood panelling put in by Wren. And really from the 1790s onwards, MPs had been complaining bitterly about this accommodation. It was stuffy, it was cramped, it was smelly when they were all in there. It wasn't big enough to house all of them. There were 648 of them. Condensation ran down the walls when they were all in there. It just became intolerable, and particularly around the debates concerning the Great Reform Bill in 1831 and 1832, the pitch of complaints really rose and rose. And behind them was an MP called Joseph Hume, who arranged for two debates in 1831 and 1833, proposing that the Commons should find alternative accommodation. One possibility was that they could break through this eastern wall and out onto the shoreline of the Thames beyond. Another proposal was that they should move out of Westminster altogether, go somewhere completely different, perhaps to St James's in the West End, which had started to become very fashionable, or even to Regent's Park, where the zoo had set up about 5 years previously. Some might feel that that's an appropriate place for the House of Commons to go to. But both of these debates got nowhere. Joseph Hume's motion fell on both of these occasions, but on the night of the fire, on the 16th of October 1834, a wag in the crowd was heard to say, "Mr. Hume's motion for a new house is carried without division. So, what caused the fire? Well, this is the primary cause of the fire here, although as we'll see there are wider causes as well. These are tally sticks, and some of you may know about tally sticks, but in case you don't, I'm going to explain what they are. I have a replica here. If I can just pass that round for people to have a look at. Make sure it comes back to me at the end, please. What's a tally stick? A tally stick is a form of medieval receipt. If you are a sheriff in the Middle Ages, you are told by the king to go off and collect taxes in your county. And you come to the Exchequer, those red-roofed buildings in the slide I showed you. You come to the Exchequer twice a year, once at Michaelmas and once at Easter, to hand over the taxes that you've collected. And the tally cutter in the Exchequer offices cuts you a tally. And it's a stick about 6 inches long, it's shaped on 4 sides. It has the name of the sheriff written on the side with the sum of money that they paid in. And the ends are notched with tiny little slices that indicate the sum of money paid in. So there's a little hole if it's a halfpenny, there's a slice if there's a penny, a bigger slice if it's a shilling, an even bigger slice if it's £1, then £10, £100, £1,000, and so on. The tally cutter then takes the stick and with a chisel and a mallet slices it in two and gives one half to the sheriff to take away and keeps another half at the Exchequer. And the idea is that the sheriff cannot come back in 6 months' time and say, I paid in £5 more than you said I did last time, because all the tally cutter has to do is to take his half of the tally stick, match it up or tally it up, which is where we get the phrase from, tally it up with the sheriff's half and show that the 2 halves of notches match each other exactly, and therefore the sheriff is not telling the truth. So it's a way of creating an unforgeable receipt for government income. Now, this was a very common system in accounting in the medieval and early modern period, and in fact it was only abolished by statute in 1783, rather incredibly. But even more incredible than that is the fact that Exchequer officials holding their posts as sinecures, what that means is, for those of you who are not sure what that is, somebody's given a title or a post, an official position in the public service, they take the money for that post, but they don't actually do the work. They delegate that work to another person. Because of this sinecure system, it meant that the tally cutting carried on in the Exchequer until 1826, which is the date on which the last sinecure post holder in the Exchequer died. So incredibly, this seemingly medieval, very efficient, but nevertheless medieval system carried on right into the 19th century. The result was that there were a couple of rooms, large rooms, inside the Exchequer buildings, filled with tally sticks in 1834. They really represented the last few decades of that whole tally cutting process. They'd never been got rid of. Over the centuries, in various phases, tally sticks had been destroyed. They'd been given away to palace servants for firewood or Exchequer servants for firewood. But the last couple of decades worth, before the final tally stick was cut in 1826, remained in these buildings. So, on the 14th of October 1834, the Clerk of Works at Westminster, Mr. Richard Webley, received an instruction from the Treasury to clear out these rooms in the Exchequer and make way for a new court. There wasn't room for this new court, the Court of Bankruptcy, in the Law Courts building, so they were going to reuse some space in the Exchequer. The tally sticks had to be cleared out, and Webley was put in charge of working out what to do about them. Instead of giving them away to palace servants, he decided, first of all, to put them in a big bonfire behind these buildings here, between the river and the Exchequer. So that was his first thought. Then he slept on the idea, and on the 15th of October, he came up with an even better wheeze, he thought. The whole bonfire idea was going to attract people pilfering them, it was going to cause annoyance to the neighbours. So he came up with an alternative, which in the end caused even more annoyance to the neighbours, and that was to burn them in the underfloor heating furnaces of the House of Lords. And I think, speaking as a professional archivist, I would say that this is possibly the worst records management disposal decision in the history of the world. So the labourers began work this very day, 179 years ago, around dawn, starting to load the coal furnaces on the ground floor of the House of Lords with these sticks. The actual chamber, which you can see here, of the House of Lords, was on the first floor. So they were underneath it. And the furnaces had flues that ran up the walls, along the floor above, and up through the walls of this chamber here, and then out through the roof, through chimneys. And it's designed to be an underfloor heating system. It was clear from quite early on in the day that all was not well. There was a very strong smell of burning, and there was smoke noticed, a little bit of smoke noticed in the chamber. Nobody did anything about it, but things really started to hot up, as it were, by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the housekeeper of the Lords was showing 2 gentlemen tourists around the building, because then as now Westminster was a tourist attraction. You'd come to the Abbey in the morning and you'd go into a Parliament in the afternoon. The tourists had come to see particularly the Armada tapestries, which are on the walls here. They're very, very famous works of art, and they portray the victory over the Armada, and they've hung in the Lord's Chamber since the early 17th century. At the public inquiry which follows the fire, the tourists say they're very disappointed because there is so much smoke in the chamber that they can't see the tapestries. What's going on? There's an enormous amount of smoke. Nobody's doing anything about it. The housekeeper who's with them tries to distract them from their disappointment, and she takes them over to this area, this red curtained area in the corner, which is called Blackrod's Box. It's a pew-type area, a wooden seat, enclosed seat, where Blackrod, the Queen's representative in what's still a royal palace officially, sits during sessions of the House of Lords. The Lords actually isn't in session at the time of the fire. It's due to come back in about 10 days' time. So they approach Blackrod's Box to have a look. But as they get close, they feel a strange sensation through their boots. They can't get any further forward because it's so hot that their feet are burning through their boots. So they back away, and the housekeeper shuffles them off to another part of the palace behind this curtain at the throne end. So what's going on? Well, what's happened underneath their feet is that the intense heat from the very careless burning of these sticks, despite what the labourers said at the public inquiry afterwards, that they'd been very, very careful. Clearly they were very negligent. They were just piling this in as fast as it would go, and it took them 8 hours anyway at that rate. It was a huge job. They piled the wood into the furnaces. The intense heaters melted the copper lining of the brick flues and it started to cause a chimney fire, and that's why there is the smoke and that's why there is this heat coming up through the floor. The brick flues themselves have already been compromised over the years because they've been regularly cut open by chimney sweeps, and one of the many ironies of the fire, and there are many, is that Parliament has only just a couple of months before the fire passed its first legislation banning child chimney sweeps from going up the chimneys and cleaning them. But the remnants of this practice are still sort of embedded in the fabric of the building because every time the flues are repaired, probably not very successfully, it leaves a gap for flames and smoke to emerge. A bit about the housekeeper as well. The actual housekeeper of the House of Lords is a very posh woman called Frances Brandish, who, as far as we know, never actually sets foot inside the building. Again, there's a sinecure post. She takes the money for the title but doesn't do any of the work. She's delegated the job to a deputy called Jane Julia Wright. Jane Julia lives on site with her family, but in fact on the day of the fire she's out visiting relatives, and she's left her mother-in-law in charge, and so it's the mother-in-law who is showing around the tourists. And I think the kindest construction that you can put on the mother-in-law's activities on the day and her lack of interest in what was going on is that she was confused about what was happening, but also, no doubt, because her family is entirely dependent on the tips from the tourists, they don't get any other salary. She's much more concerned with making sure that the tourists have a good time and that they're happy, rather than investigating any health and safety disaster that might be occurring below their feet. So the workmen knock off work about 4 o'clock. They go and have a pint of beer at the Star and Garter pub across the road. The housekeeper shuts up the Lord's chamber at about 5 o'clock, and then everything's quiet for about an hour. And at 6 o'clock, the wife of the doorkeeper comes back from running an errand, and she crosses the darkened House of Lords lobby, and as she does so, she sees a flickering from underneath the door. She opens up the doors and sees that Blackrod's box is going up in flames. The flames have finally made it through the floor. They've caught on the wooden panelling here and now on the curtains, and she screams out, "Oh good God, the House of Lords is on fire!" And then there's panic inside the palace for about 25 minutes. They don't know what to do. Richard Webley, the Clerk of Works, runs up onto the roof because small flames are starting to emerge through the chimney above the Lords. He tries to put it out with a bucket of water, and that doesn't do any good. And for some reason they don't alert the Commons at the other end of the building. They don't alert, apparently, the outside world at all. But the outside world is alerted about 25 minutes later when a huge ball of fire bursts out of the front here and up through the roof. During the research of my book, I learned a lot about firefighting theory, more than I thought I would ever need to. And I can tell you that what happens there is a flashover. It's clear from eyewitness accounts, this is what is going on. And for those of you who don't know what a flashover is when you have a fire in an enclosed space, the toxic gases and the smoke rise to the ceiling, and then they start to fall. And as they fall, they heat up all the surroundings in the room, all the furniture and fabrics and so on, and create a great rolling explosive ball. And this is what happens, and it looks like this. And the palace fire immediately lights up the London skyline. Dusk has fallen, and people from across London can see this blaze, a sudden bright light on the horizon from all the high ground around London, Hampstead, Blackheath, and so on. The King and Queen at Windsor don't need to be sent telegram by horse. They can see it 20 miles away. And Charles Barry, the architect of the new palace, is travelling back from Brighton over the South Downs by stagecoach. And as the coach comes over the top of the downs and he sees the fire below in London, he's supposed to have said, "What a chance for an architect." So the immediate response to the fire comes from parish fire engines. Each parish is supposed to have an engine of some sort available to fight fires in the immediate area, but they're very, very small. At the time, obviously, fire engines are manually pumped. They're pumps that you attach a hose to the nearest understreet water main, and you draw up the water into the engine by manually pumping it on both sides with a team of volunteers, and the firemen take a hose out the other side and spray the water over the fire. So the parish engines are really completely inadequate to the task. A few private insurance company engines turn up then. There was no public fire brigade at the time in London. There are just one or two of them. Again, they don't have much impact. So it's only when this man, James Braidwood, superintendent of the London Fire Engine Establishment, gets the call at his headquarters in the City of London at about 5 minutes past 7. So we're now an hour after the fire is first spotted inside the palace. It's only when he gets the call that a bit more professional firefighters start to come on their way. So the London Fire Engine Establishment was created just a year before the fire, and it pulled together the resources of 10 private insurance companies into one brigade. It was still private, but they had at their disposal far more men, far more engines, and far more equipment and expertise. So he arrives at the scene about another 25 minutes afterwards with about 14 or 15 engines and 66 firefighters. By then, the fire has taken complete hold of the House of Lords, and you can see in this picture here that it's spreading wildly because of the interior of the palace, the flammable materials inside, the incredibly old structures, the winding corridors with absolutely no fire protection whatsoever. The whole thing has just gone up. He arrives just as the House of Lords roof falls in, and he realises that really the House of Lords is beyond hope. So his decision on the evening is to abandon the House of Lords and try and save areas that have yet to be largely affected, including Westminster Hall and the Speaker's House to the north of the site. The south of the site is generally left to perish, or at least it will be sacrificed if it means being able to save the northern end. So let's look at a few pictures of the fire then. This is the view across Old Palace Yard, really, that first slide that I showed you, the view at around probably 7:30, 8 o'clock. And it's a sensational view, it's very crude engraving, and it's designed to be handed out to the public in the days after the fire. It's designed to titillate, it's a sort of Sun type, gotcha type view of the fire. The interesting thing from our point of view is you can see how much space has been cleared in front of the palace by the soldiers and by the police here, designed to give the firefighters enough room to fight the fire, but also you have to remember that of course the government at the time didn't know that this wasn't simply the first stage in a national insurrection. There was a lot of unrest in the country at the time. There was a lot of agrarian unrest, the Captain Swing riots in the countryside. There was a lot of unrest around the passing of the Poor Law Amendment Act just a couple of months before, which created the workhouse system, the notorious system that Dickens railed about in Oliver Twist. And also, they didn't know whether this was some foreign power come to sort of foment revolution in London. Those of you who like musical films, Les Miserables describes the revolution in Paris in 1830, and the authorities were incredibly nervous that something like this could happen at any time in London. So that's probably what this is showing us. Same view almost, a much better artist now. This is William Heath, very well-known engraver at the time. This is a lithograph drawn, as it says, by him very proudly on the picture itself, drawn by him by the light of the flames at the south of the palace. And this is a fantastic documentary view of what's going on at the fire. You can see the very brisk southwest wind blowing the flames across the core of the palace that eyewitnesses comment on the night. You can see householders hanging out of the buildings here, trying to get a better view. Hundreds of thousands of people crowded towards Westminster from all across London to see the fire. Within half an hour of the fire appearing, it was really difficult to get anywhere near the front of the crowds, and all the bridges were clogged, all the roads were clogged. It wasn't possible for carriages to get anywhere near. But some rich people did manage to elbow their way to the front, and we know that they were bribing householders to let them sit on the balconies to get a better view. You can see how close Westminster Abbey is here to the palace, which I mentioned earlier, and that's important in terms of the worries again that the authorities had that the Abbey might go up in flames, and also various public records, various government records were stored in the chapter house of the Abbey, this end of the Abbey, including Domesday Book, our oldest public record, and there were fears that that might be destroyed as well. And you can just see in the background there St Margaret's Church. Again, when you exit here and you go back to Westminster Tube, you'll be able to see St Margaret's Church right by Westminster Abbey. It looks tiny here beside Westminster Abbey, but it's actually a really big parish church, big enough in fact for it to become a repository for salvaged furniture that was being got out of the building before the fire burnt it to pieces. So if you look at the central part of this slide now, you can see the fire engines here with a hose going to the street plug under the pavement, the volunteer firemen here pumping the engines. There's a fireman here with a little axe, and he's probably about to go into the building to save some treasures. And we know that this is how, on the night of the fire, the great silver maces that today you see on the house, the table of the house, whenever you watch Prime Minister's Question Time, you'll see this great silver bauble, great silver stick at the front, which represents the power and authority of Parliament. That was saved on the night of the fire by a bunch of solicitors and some firemen shinning up ladders to the 4th floor of the palace, breaking open the windows and pulling out the maces to save them. Here you've got a horse and cart evacuating some books, possibly documents from the building as well. And this is how I personally became interested in the fire, because when I arrived at the Parliamentary Archives in a new job in 1999, one of the first things that I had to be trained on was to tell the public who come into our research room, and we're open all year round, anybody can come in and use our services, please come and visit us. I had to tell them that nearly all of the House of Commons records before 1834 were destroyed in this enormous fire. So it wasn't just a huge architectural disaster, it was a massive archival disaster as well. And I wanted to find out more about it. I wanted to understand more about the history of the collections that we had. And I couldn't find out very much. Books about the new Palace of Westminster perhaps devoted a paragraph to the old palace and a sentence about the fire. Nothing else. So I squirreled about a bit, and I found the official report of the public inquiry that followed the fire, explaining its causes. And then I found some newspaper accounts describing the fire. And every time I found something, I would stick it in a drawer. And over about 8 years, I kept sort of picking up little bits here and there in a very random sort of fashion. And after about 8 years, I got an overflowing drawer, and I thought I really ought to do something with this. So I wrote a book. So that's how it came about, really from my curiosity about the fire. And the book has turned into a micro-history. It's a very detailed, forensic CSI Westminster type sort of approach to the fire. That wasn't my intention at the beginning, but it's really because as I got the answer to one question, it opened up a whole load of other questions. And so I kept having to answer more and more questions. And so it became a very detailed 24-hour look at not just the burning of the palace, but of the whole sort of social, political and economic context in which this occurred. And then finally in this picture we can see a figure here. I don't know if you can make out what that is. Anyone want to shout out? Dog, thank you. It's a dog, it's this dog, Chance the Fire Dog, the celebrity mascot of the London fire engine establishment. And if he'd been around today, Chance would have been on the front cover of Hello magazine about every other week. He was really well known at the time. He was there on the night of the fire. We know that because Charles Dickens, who before he became a novelist was a parliamentary reporter, describes him being there. So Dickens was sitting in those public galleries of the Lords and the Commons, taking notes of debates and then having them published in the newspaper he worked for, the Morning Chronicle. And some of his very earliest work are parliamentary sketches and street sketches, sketches of London life. And in one of them he describes Chance at the fire, running up and down, barking noisily, making a lot of noise, being a nuisance, and compares him unfavourably to an MP called Mr. Hughes, the MP for Oxford City, who was running up and down, barking enormously, making a lot of noise and being annoying. Very typical sort of Dickensian response to politicians. Chance was originally a Spitalfields weaver's dog, but he showed a marked tendency to turn up to fires wherever the London fire engine establishment was. So the firemen adopted him, and he accompanied them to all of their fires, really. So he really was a big society figure. He was a big figure on the London scene. And as you can see, William Heath again painted his portrait here at the fire. He died, happily not at the fire, but of natural causes about a year later. But the firemen loved him so much that they sent him to a taxidermist to be stuffed as a memorial. But the taxidermist realised that he got a gold mine on his hands because this dog is a total celebrity. So instead of handing him back to the fireman, he pockets the money and then passes him on to a travelling fairground. who also pay him for the privilege of having Chance's body on display. The firemen find out about this as a big fight. They grab their dog back, and they finally manage to put him in pride of place in their headquarters in Watling Street in the City of London near St Paul's. And there he stays until around 1880, when he's auctioned off for a fireman's benevolent fund, and we don't know where he is now. So if you happen to see a dog that looks a bit like this in a glass case in a junk shop on Portobello Road, or in a boot sale or something like that, then I would really like to hear from you. So the third view across Old Palace Yard, we've seen the sensational view, we've seen the documentary view. This is what I think of as the psychological view, and who better to do this than Turner? This is a fantastic watercolour, one of several sketches and watercolours by Turner, which are now at Tate Britain, just down the road in Millbank. It gives you a sense of the overwhelming impression that the fire made on contemporaries. I mentioned that I couldn't find out much about the fire when I started to research it. One thing that secondary accounts tended to say all the time was people stood around clapping and cheering because the Houses of Parliament were going up in flames. And actually, if you look at the eyewitness accounts of what's going on and people's personal correspondence about it, that's not really what's going on. There is perhaps a little bit of cheering, people are drunk and so on. And there is some clapping. But I came to the conclusion, reading people's accounts, that they're clapping because this is an occasion that is completely outside their normal everyday life. Obviously, this is before electricity is available, electric light is available, gas lighting has only just come in the streets. It's before limelight is invented on the stage. And really, people's experience of light shows would be restricted to fireworks at grand state occasions like coronations, or perhaps in the pleasure gardens like Vauxhall Gardens across the river. So really, this huge display of light, which people commented on at the time, and floodlit, as we would say today, floodlit the towers of Westminster Abbey, so that many people commented on the eerie effects of the light and how overwhelming it was. This was something that really became, if you like, what today we would call a sort of cinematic spectacle. They would clap when the flames shot up into the air, and they're huge flames, as I've already indicated, sparks running over people's heads, the firemen being incredibly brave. Whenever there was a crash and roofs and walls fell in, the whole scene had become objectified, and they were clapping as if they were at a theatrical show. And I think that Turner really gives a sense of that, and he also gives a sense of how terrifying this was for people, and many people describe this event as sublime, and Turner is an expert in the sublime. The idea that humans are tiny little ants in the wake of enormous elemental forces. I mean, that's obviously what Turner specialises in. And here he is doing that at the fire. And many people comment on how awesome the fire is, how awful, and in the true sense of the word, they are terrified by it. They are absolutely struck dumb by the nature of the fire. And some people clearly suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the fire, including the Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, who suffered from depression through his life, really quite badly at times. He had very dark moments, and his contemporary biographer describes how during his darkest moments he would get flashbacks to the fire, and a number of other people showed signs of, documented signs of having this response to the fire. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of the whole thing as well. So, by 9 o'clock, the House of Commons here has completely perished. It's gone up like a Roman candle in about 5 minutes, around 8 o'clock. Behind this sheet of flame is Westminster Hall, and that causes the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the middle of the evening to shout out, "Damn the House of Commons, let it blaze away, but save, oh save the hall." And that's what all of the volunteers are doing by the later part of the evening. You can see hundreds of people here on the floor of Westminster Hall, the great Norman feasting hall built at the end of the 11th century. It was the core of the old royal palace with its wonderful 14th century hammer beam roof, one of the masterpieces, perhaps the greatest masterpiece of English medieval carpentry. Everybody is desperate to save this iconic building where so much English history has taken place. And what you can see here is people shinning up the ladders to get to the windows at the side, to break open the windows, to get onto the roof and take the tiles off the roof to create a fire break. And you can see the fire on the opposite side of the window here. We're looking southwards, so the fire is surrounding the building at this end. And you can just see some firemen there on the ledge below. If we just look here in a bit more detail at the centre, the fire engine hoses weren't long enough to stretch all the way along Westminster Hall because it's so gigantic. So the fire engines had to be joined up in relays with their hoses so the water could be piped from New Palace Yard outside all the way down to the bottom end of the hall. And you can see that here. Here's one engine, there's another one there, and they sort of thread their way up to the top of the hall. And I mentioned about volunteers pumping the fire engines, and James Braidwood would have had at his disposal engines that required 20 volunteers to pump them. Really, really hard work, would have taken an immense amount of effort. People would have had to do it only in relays of 5 minutes at a time and then come out and have a rest, go back for another 5 minutes. And once they'd done an hour's worth of this, they were paid in beer. They got a token to exchange for a pint of beer in the local pubs. And one of the aspects of research I enjoyed doing most was trying to work out how many pints of beer were drunk on the night by volunteers based on the compensation claims that came in from the local pubs afterwards, who'd had to sort of shell out all these barrels of beer. So, the firemen were incredibly brave. They took their hoses, and 3 of them stood on this tiny little lead platform, this little lead flat here, outside the south wing of the hall. So all of this is ablaze, all of this is ablaze. They've got the area in front of them completely ablaze as well, just the glass behind them. And they're spraying the water over the flames ahead of them to protect the fire. They're hampered in their activities, both in Westminster Hall and in saving the riverside of the palace here. As you can see, it's all completely ablaze as well, by the fact that the river is at low tide. It's not as it is today, with a big embankment on either side. There was no embankment at the time. Charles Barry, when he designed the new palace, pushed the palace out into the river, onto, if you like, a concrete pontoon, pushed the whole focus of the palace much further back. What you can see here are the residences and buildings of the palace, and there were gardens here, and then they just led straight down to the shoreline, and you can see the river at low tide here. And that was preventing the London fire engine establishment's super duper sort of BMW piece of kit from coming upriver. This here, which you may just be able to make out, is the great floating engine of the London fire engine establishment, a large barge-mounted engine that could take its supply of water up from the river, could suck the water up from the river, so it had an unlimited supply, unlike those fire engines on the shore side that couldn't stretch their hoses into the water. Because it was low tide, it couldn't get upriver until about 1 o'clock in the morning. It was moored downstream, downriver, 4 miles downriver at Rotherhithe. And I mentioned the Turner watercolour earlier. Here is a Turner oil who produced 2 of his most famous paintings as a result of the fire. This is the first one, fantastic picture of the fire. You can just see the northern gable end there of Westminster Hall and the towers of the Abbey behind. But from our point of view, what it's also showing us is the tugboat here pulling the floating engine up towards Westminster. So fantastic picture there by Turner. So the engine arrives about 2 o'clock, and it makes an immediate difference to the firefight with Westminster Hall. So that, plus the bravery of the firemen and all the efforts of the hundreds of volunteers, and a lucky change of wind direction as well, all helped to save Westminster Hall, which still survives today. So Westminster Hall survives here. The law courts amazingly survived the fire. But the core of the palace, this grey area here, is burnt away. and is largely gutted. So a few before and after pictures then. So this is not a photograph, this is just a very fine charcoal drawing. It's just a few years before photography was invented. If only they'd waited a few more years before, and then we could have had some proper photographs of the interior. Interior of the House of Commons then, if you just keep your eyes on the three windows at the far end there, we'll see what it looked like afterwards. So what you can see has happened here, those are the three windows. The ceiling and the floor put in by Wren to create that wooden panelled chamber have been completely collapsed by the roof falling in, and what's revealed is the fantastic 14th century chapel that was once in the royal palace. And this is something that antiquaries at the time absolutely raved about. They felt that this was the true building coming back to life again, shed of all its filthy later accretions by politics and inferior architects. This was the true medieval palace, and this is one of the reasons why Pugin, the co-designer of the Houses of Parliament with Barry, felt that this was an amazing spectacle, and you can see people here sightseeing the ruins. Another important part of the palace was the painted chamber. It's so called because it had wonderful wall paintings on it in the Middle Ages. It was the bedroom of the king in the original medieval palace. They had long since been hidden under all the layers of whitewash you can see on the walls here, but they were there underneath, and at the beginning of the 19th century they were starting to be uncovered and were starting to be surveyed. And you may just be able to make them out here on this watercolour. In the window displays great gigantic figures of the virtues and vices, biblical scenes. There was a huge mural of the coronation of Edward the Confessor as well, all designed to inspire the monarchs who slept and worked in this room. Just before the fire, it was in use as a court called the Court of Requests, which is what you can see here. And if you just keep your eyes on the three windows at the far end again, we'll see what it looks like afterwards. It looks like that. So again, the roof has fallen in. Any of those paintings that have survived under the whitewash have all been burnt away. But what you can also see is that these walls are pretty sturdy, these really thick medieval walls, in some of the oldest parts of the palace. And they were found to be sound enough to be re-roofed. And in fact, this space, the painted chamber, became the temporary House of Lords while the new palace was built up around it, so that the Lords could carry on sitting, and was finally abandoned in 1847 when the Lords moved into their new accommodation and knocked down in 1851. So a view across the rooftops now, St Stephen's Chapel again. Next to the chapel had been a cloister for the canons of the chapel, and you can just see inside here a little fire crew still fighting the flames with their engine as they burst out. Although the fire was under control by about 3 in the morning on the 17th of October, it actually took 5 more days to quell it completely. Areas kept bursting out in flames, and the firemen only left nearly a week later. So what you can see here is that view across the rooftops of the half-ruined cloister there, but it still survives today. It's still here in the new Houses of Parliament, buried deep within the palace, but it's still there, a really important piece of medieval architecture. But the whole of this has been gutted. You can just see residents of the palace here, and probably about 100 people, at least 100 people actually lived inside the palace. And saw the flames coming towards them on the night of the fire. You can just see them sort of peering out of the windows to see the devastation, some salvaged material here. So the view across Old Palace Yard again, the morning after. It looks fairly complete here in this very quick charcoal sketch, but what you need to understand is that this is just a shell. There's nothing behind these walls. They're completely blank. All the floors have fallen through. It's devastated. You can just perhaps see a ladder going up here. There's another fire crew here the morning after trying to quell the flames inside that committee floor there. This must have been sketched very early in the morning on the 17th of October, because we know that by midday hoarding has started to go up across the front of the palace, because these stone towers here, as they cooled, started to collapse and endanger the crowds, equally large crowds as the previous night, who were coming to look at the ruins. And I do just wonder if this guy here, who's pulling some planks off a cart, if that isn't the start of the hoarding going up at the front of the palace. A little bit more of a look at that central portion, the cotton mill facade again. You can see that the cotton mill has collapsed, it's completely gone, and behind it is revealed the medieval walls of what in 1834 was the House of Lords chamber, where the fire first started. Again, these are found on surveying to be sturdy enough to be re-roofed, and so that building, the old House of Lords, becomes the temporary House of Commons up until around 1851, when the new Commons moves into its new accommodation. Just a quick view of the devastation from the riverside. This is really just to show you what's happened to this building here, which is the Commons Library. The whole of the 3-floor frontage of the Commons Library has collapsed in. And I think that may be responsible for the great devastation to the parliamentary records, the House of Commons records, because I suspect that quite a few of them were stored in there in 1834. Happily, however, the Lords' records survived. The Lords' records were in an undamaged portion of the palace, close to the painted chamber, and also in the Jewel Tower, which again, if you exit here and head back towards Westminster Tube, you may be able to see the Jewel Tower beyond Westminster Abbey. Today it's run by English Heritage. In the Middle Ages it was part of the outside precincts of the palace, part of the outside wall of the palace. It had been detached for many centuries at the time of the fire, but that was where the Lords stored their archives. And so as a result of that, we have all the legislation passed by Parliament from the late 15th century onwards, great treasures like the Bill of Rights, the Great Reform Act, and the Charles I's death warrant, which were all Lords rather than Commons records. So salvage operations occur very quickly afterwards. There's a big push to clear the site. Nobody dies in the fire, amazingly. Plenty of people die during salvage operations, however. They fall off walls fall on them, they strangle themselves on ropes, they fall into pits, all sorts of things like that. But here is somebody who's not yet had an unlucky mishap. He's just sitting there, smoking a pipe just before knocking down this amazing medieval doorway. So a final farewell then to the palace. You can see it here, the remnants of the old palace there, snuggled in old palace yard, with a big palace, the big new palace rising up around it. The perspective in this picture, which is part of a much bigger sketch drawn from a balloon around 1849, 1850, I guess, is all shot to pieces. So there's no Westminster Hall, that's completely disappeared, and Westminster Abbey has been stretched vertically, so it looks a bit like Cologne Cathedral. I don't think that the old palace was quite as weeny as this compared with the new one. It's designed to create an impression, this picture, but it's nevertheless a very poignant reminder of what we lost on the 16th of October 1834. So coming out of the fire then, we have the new Houses of Parliament, perhaps the most famous building in Britain across the world. We have a number of other occurrences coming out of the fire. Here is a second Turner painting. Both of these fantastic oils, the one with the floating engine and this one, both of them are currently in America. They left the country in the 19th century, sadly. It would be wonderful to have them here in Tate Britain. Sadly, that's not going to happen. But they are two of his most important works, and really part of the crowning achievement of his career. Other things that came out of the fire include the first public London Fire Brigade. In fact, the London Fire Brigade wasn't created until 1866, but there were constant calls in the papers and in government for the creation of a single public fire brigade for London from 1834 onwards. Other things that came out of the fire include a new record-keeping system for the country. So those of you who are historians, who perhaps have worked at the National Archives, you have this fire to thank for the national record-keeping and the National Archives that we have today. The Record Commission, which today we would call a failing government department, that was in charge of keeping public records, including Domesday Book, was found to have been absolutely incompetent on the night of the fire. And it was closed down very shortly after the fire. There was a royal commission into the future of how the country should keep its historic archives, whose report started, no one can now be in any doubt the danger from fire to our national records. And that led directly to the Public Record Office Act of 1838, which set up what was then the Public Record Office, now the National Archives. Dickens, obviously I mentioned that Dickens was heavily influenced by the fire. There's no direct evidence, interestingly, that he was actually there at the fire. His letters for this period don't survive, and if he was filing copy for the Morning Chronicle, there weren't any bylines to tell us that it was his. But I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that he was there. Obviously I mentioned the sketch about chance. He mentions it in much later life, in a speech on bureaucracy, in the 1850s, and then I think there are also clues in his novels as well. We know that fire plays a big part in the denouement of various novels, including Bleak House and Great Expectations, but I think most tellingly in Oliver Twist, published just a couple of years after this fire, there is a description of an enormous fire, which really doesn't take the narrative forward in any way. It's when Bill Sykes flees London after beating Nancy to death, and as he leaves London, he helps to put out an enormous fire. And if you compare that description that Dickens has in Oliver Twist with the description of the fire that other eyewitnesses give in their private correspondence, for example, you compare it with Pugin, who we know to have been there at the fire, compare those two descriptions, they're very, very similar. And so I do just wonder if this isn't Dickens telling us what it was like to actually watch his workplace go up in flames on the evening of the 16th of October. There are a whole host of other much smaller effects on individuals, on institutions and so on. But overall, there are plenty of reasons why I think the day Parliament burned down is worth remembering. So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take your questions.